On behalf of the Truro Historical Society and the Highland House Museum, I am so happy that I drew the long straw, which means that I get the opportunity to welcome you here tonight. My name is Barbara Ann Kearney, and I have a fairly long history on the Washoe Shores, so it's not that long, but I have a history of serving as a volunteer here for a number of years. But I'm having a great deal of fun serving this season as the museum co-manager, along with Janice Pelosi. A lot of you know Janice. The comments left in our guest book each and every day are a constant reminder of how much reward there is in sharing the history of our unique small town. As I like to say, small town, big history. Along these lines, I would be remiss if I didn't urge you to consider supporting the Historical Society's efforts by joining as a member, or by volunteering, or both. You can also support us by taking part in our current fundraiser. Coming into the museum this evening, you may have noticed that the lobby has been turned into a gallery with over 30 art pieces, all done by Truro folks. This is our 4th annual community art project. So on your way out after the talk, I invite you to take a peek. We even have a piece featuring Dave's cottages. The bidding is taking place online, and tomorrow at midnight is actually the deadline, so it's great timing. We would appreciate your support. There are volunteers and members of the board floating around tonight, and they will be more than happy to orient you as to how to bid. We're also grateful for your donations on the way out the door. We have 2 bowls, and we would gratefully receive those as well. So all summer long, we've had a number of great talks in our series of Wednesday night lectures. But I have to say, this turnout tonight is wonderful and beyond expectations. Shout out to all my friends and neighbors from Beach Point and Shore Road in the audience. It's so nice to have you here. But moreover, a great big thanks to all of you for coming. To me, it's testimony to how deeply felt are the cottage colonies of Truro. And for so many reasons, from being the wellspring of a wonderful set of summer memories for so many, to providing a cherished thread of continuity across generations of family, and to the special beauty of the site of the small, humble dwellings tucked into our landscape, whether nestled in a grove of trees or sweetly lined up along the shoreline. These things and more at the heart of Jane's talk this evening. I'm delighted to introduce Jane Weissman, a friend as well as a colleague, as we share many local history interests, including cottage colonies. Jane spent 35 years in the clean energy sector, moving technologies like solar photovoltaics into mainstream use. For over 2 decades, she was president and CEO of the Interstate Renewable Energy Council, a national policy organization. Upon retiring from the renewable energy field, she turned to other deep interests, history and social change. A recent life event was sailing the Mekong River in 2017, and then again in 2018. She logged around 800 miles through Laos, Cambodia, and South Vietnam. Jane now splits her time between Boston and Providence. Jane is the author of the Provincetown Railroad, The Tracks of Change, and the Provincetown Railroad Heritage Trail book. And let me add, we have both of those for sale tonight. And Jane is very generous in that all the proceeds go to us at THS. So we're very grateful for that. As they say, without further ado, Jane Weissman, the floor is yours, and we are so excited. Thank you.
Barbara, thank you, and wow, I'm just amazed. I appreciate you all being here, and friends and dear people. So thank you very much for your time tonight, and I know it's probably pre-dinner hour, so I will try to keep to schedule and move forward. This is a topic that I find incredibly exciting. Over the past 2 years, having done a lot of research and talking with people. But before I start, I do want to thank the Truro Historical Society for hosting this, certainly, and also at Cobb, Helen McNeil and Norman Pope for all the help they've given me in digging through their wonderful archives over there. And certainly all the people that I've talked to and have given me just wonderful information and the personality of these wonderful little cabins. So let me start by simply saying that there are so many of these cottages, wonderful marine names, shore names, beach names, family names, running all over. And the first effort that I had was, how do I get my arms around all of these wonderful cottages? So what I did was that I said, okay, first of all, I'm only going to look at the Outer Cape, Eastham, Wellfleet, Truro, obviously, and Provincetown, and pretty much just keep to those cottages. I know that, so many of us either have strong memories of the cottages. Some of us now own some of the cottages, or a cottage, but I think we all collectively have these cottages in our conscious as we drive down Shore Road, as we drive over Pilgrim Heights coming into P-Town, and seeing these wonderful cottages along the way. The first thing that I did is I started with about 50 cottages and ended up really surveying about 25 of them to really put some information and history and stories behind it. I did not want to produce a travel guide, list of accommodations. I was really looking for history along the way. So one of the big questions is, what is a cottage colony? And I have some municipal definitions which are pretty much all the same, that they are detached dwellings for a transient population under a single ownership in a single lot. And in some cases, there's limit on how many stories, and in other cases, sometimes there's limit on square footage. But basically, the definition of a cottage colony is codified in a lot of the bylaws, zoning bylaws of the towns along the way. Interesting enough, P-Town doesn't define cottage colony. They say that they might, but they haven't. They define just about, B&B and all the other accommodations, but they, for some reason, don't define cottage colony. Those are the kind of bureaucratic definitions. The more wonderful definitions is one frequent guest called it a pop-up neighborhood. Jay, you called it very much a community in your discussions about Sunset Acres. Easy place to make friends, cocktails at 5. That was Dwayne Chase from Smith Heights in Eastham. Almost like a little camp. The parks have told me those stories and how wonderful that is. And our friend Margaret McNeil, who I don't know if is here, but she called it a sweep-out cottage, which I think speaks to the simplicity that all you need is a broom to sweep it out, and that's what makes it such a wonderful cottage. I tried to grasp the history of this by turning it into different stages. The early years, the boom years, pre and post World War II, and then of course, the condo conversion. Is that better, Ken? Okay, good. So let me start with the early years, and no surprise, a lot of these different stages, periods, are determined and shaped by transportation. So a topic obviously dear to my heart is the railroad brought the first bunch of cottages out to, brought the first tourists out to the cottages on the Abbey Cape. You had 11 different stations along the way from Eastham right up to Provincetown. 2 of them were flag stops, but it was the railroad that brought out the first group of summer tourists. And the interesting thing is that these initial early stage cottages clusters were pretty much self-contained. Of course, being here, you have to talk about the Highland House. Now, some people would call that a more of a resort rather than a colony, but I couldn't stand here today and not include it. So, and happily so. Then there was Ballstown, Bungalows Colony, Longnook, Cornhill, Whitman House, Walsh Cottages, Sladeville, Collins, and Smith Heights. In both of the Collins Cove and Smith Heights are in Eastham. What's interesting is that a couple of these places were pretty much self-contained, which means that they had dining facilities, they had recreation, both Highland House as well as both Bungalow Colony. They had bowling alleys and both had golf courses. Now I've heard a couple of different stories about Boston Beach's golf, whether it was 3-hole course or 9-hole course. It's no longer there, obviously, but certainly Highland Links is famous for the wonderful golf course that it is. But all of these 3 had on-site food, on-site recreation, and of course they had the beach, which was wonderful. But at this point in time, tourists they came by train, they didn't have cars, so they weren't touring around the Cape. Pretty much they came, they got off at the railroad station, and in this case, it was either the Truro stop, Cornhill stop, or North Truro. And they took a horse-drawn carriage or buggy or wagon, and they pretty much stayed put all summer long. So that really changed as we moved on. Just quickly, some of these colonies are still standing. Some are gone, and one is changing, as we all know about the Walsh cottages. Down off of 6. And in Highland House, there are privately owned, there are 3 privately owned cottages right at sort of the ridge of the golf course. Some of them have been moved, and one is now the pro shop, the golf pro shop, and the others have pretty much been demolished. And I thank Janice Pelosi for putting together a great map of where the cottages were and where they have gone. Okay, we're coming into the first boom period, and that's pretty much the automobile. And it's pretty much the Model T, which was mass-produced, became affordable, and it was what people were buying, especially because of, as I said, because of the price. Now, interestingly, the Ford Motor Company initiated the 40-hour work week. And I don't think it was really so much the good heart of Henry Ford that did this, but more the fact that if people had the weekend, 2 days off, they would buy the cars and go on trips. And so it became a selling point for his employees to buy cars and then take 2 days off. And it really wasn't this, Ford did this in the early 20s, and it wasn't until 1938 that it became part of the federal legislation and it became a national practice. And of course, you can't have beach picnics or roadside picnics without sliced bread. And Wonder Bread came along in 1930 to make the perfect picnic. So in this first boom wave, you still had the problems with roads. You may have a car, but the roads were muddy, sandy, and hard, and not particularly safe. So roads that became paved was certainly an enabler to get people to the different destinations, beachside destinations. The bridges, in 1911 and 1913, the Bourne and Sagamore were drawbridges. They were that built in, as was the railroad bridge. And then in the early 30s, they were replaced by the fixed arch structures that we know today. So the bridges became more efficient, not only for the driver, but also for the mariner. This first wave, this is interesting, and I kind of struggled a little bit with this because it's hard to determine when you're looking at a lot of the assessor databases and the different the registry, the Barnstable Registry of Deeds. It's sometimes difficult to determine when property was bought, when maybe the first cottage was built, and maybe what was the date when the business was opened. So a lot of these kind of fall maybe later in the 40s or earlier in the 40s. It's not an exact science, but one of the first cottages colonies was Young's Tourist Camp, and that was really the first sign of roadside cottage colonies. And as Barbara said, these roadside cottages, clusters of cottages but they added to the self-contained larger colonies that I talked about a little bit earlier. Now Young's, now we know it as Prince of Wales, which has gone through a couple of iterations. It was bought in 2021 by Lexfest and recently renovated. So when you look at them, and you can see from the older picture and then from the later picture that it's pretty similar in its footprint. Of course, you can't have a discussion about these cottage colonies without Dave's cottages. And they really are the poster child, and wonderfully so. And here's a shot of it when they opened in 1931, and this was a shot, I don't know the exact date, but you can tell by the cars that it was a little bit later. You can see on the right side the market, and pretty much the lineup of the cottages as we know today. This is the same shot, but taken a couple of months ago, and it's pretty much looking the same. And Greg, I don't know where Greg is sitting, but Greg Russo, you had really a wonderful quote when you said, Dave's cottages really speak to something unchangeable. And it's so true. By the condo docs, you're allowed to change the inside, to renovate the inside, but you can't change the outside in terms of doors, windows, color scheme, and so forth. And tomorrow, Susan, I'll be here to see your cottage inside and how that works. So that was Dave's. And then the Preston camps and cottages. This is an interesting story because it has quite a history. Preston camps and cottages were just when you kind of get into P-Town, not that far away where the Maryland Monroe garage doors are in that vicinity. So the Preston camps and cottages, camps were on the hill, and the cottages were on the beach. And in the late 50s, the property was sold, and the Tides motor inn was the cottages dispersed, and I'll get to that in a second, but the Tides motor inn basically cleared the property and built this massive motel. What's a wonderful story is that these cottages, some of these cottages still exist. You have 3 of them that were moved to Ainsworth Cottage Colony, which was really right next door. 4 were moved to Shulster Boulevard. It's not quite right, but close enough. It's right behind the Sand Castle Hotel. So these cottages still exist, and one of them was moved again right past Days Market as part of Foley's Cottages. But then the Tides it didn't last that long, because in 2008 that was gone, and there were the Bay Harbor Boulevard was created, and now there are 8 single-family cottage houses, huge houses, that now are on the site where Preston Campton Cottages used to be. So that went through quite a change over the years. And I'm sure a lot of us remember, the Tides. We used to go and get breakfast at Noreen's, and I think Chach used to make dinner there. So, but gone, and now we have 8 very nice looking but large homes. Then there's Kalmar Village, and this has a whole bunch of stories, which was really fun. First of all, when you have all these different nautical names of these cottages, Kalmar just seems so out of the ordinary. So the Benson family were the first owners, and their ancestry was Swedish. And Kalmar is a city in southeast Sweden on the Baltic Sea. Kalmar, there are a couple of translations, means calm, peacefulness, which is appropriate for a beachside vacation cottage. And Kalmar also means beautiful sea. So that now makes sense why it's called Kalmar Village. You'll see that I get curious about the funniest things. But anyway, in the late 40s, the Ramney family bought it, and I had the pleasure of talking with Carol Ramney Mooney, who grew up at Kalmar Village, and she was just thrilled to talk about growing up and what she did there. And then the Prelack family took over from the Ramney family, and Dave Prelack, to this day, runs for the family the property. Now, just a couple of other things about Kalmar. Carol Mooney said that her father was very proud because Kalmar was one of the few places, actually the only place I could find, that was listed in the Green Book. And many of us know the Green Book from the movie. And you can see with the red arrow, you can see that Kalmar Village is listed there. And that, she said her dad was so proud that they were listed, which when you look at the opposite in terms of a welcoming mat and not a welcoming mat, was Delft Haven, which is, as most of you know, is now a bunch of condos at the far end of the west end of P-Town. And the Carpenters started this, what they considered a very high-end resort. And they were quite clear that patronage was restricted, right on their brochure, something that we would find intolerable today. Ralph Carpenter, he was not a very nice person. He was very protective of his clientele, and certainly was not fond of the homosexuals that were moving into town. So just, night and day in terms of Kalmar versus Delft Haven. Carol talked about how she not only did, it really shows that so many of these cottage colonies were family family affairs that everybody chipped in and did work around the property. But she also played with the guests, and she told a story about what was fun was in the evening, a parent would yell out, "ice cream train," and they would all get in the car and go down to Priscilla's for ice cream. But she also, along with usual chores, one of the chores was daily sweeping of the beach, which in that part of Beach Point is not inconsequential. It's a huge beach. It only grows where you have on the Atlantic side, as we all know, the erosion and the beachfront being diminished. This part of the Cape, the sand grows. So it's an interesting juxtaposition of what's going on one side of Beach Point and on the other side of Beach Point. So one of the questions I had was why the black bands, black rings around the chimneys? Because it's just so different from all the other cottages along the way. One story is that it was a mark, a sign that a loyalist to the British government was the homeowner, and then hence it was called the Tory chimney. Another story says that it was a sign that it was part of the Underground Railroad. It could also be that it was just part of the colonial style that was fitting to the cottages at Kalmar. And then there was that practical side saying the black rings just hid the stains from the chimney, which probably made no sense. I had the pleasure of being in contact with Mitchell Johnson, who's an international artist, internationally known artist, and he has been coming to Truro for many, many years and has done wonderful paintings of Kalmar and Village and other places around, Days, of course, and other sites around Truro, and just really said that he was, obviously the light, the quality, the weather, all of these things made it so special, as we know. But his one quote was that the intimate setting of the cottages acts like a stage, and I thought that was very reflective of how exciting this was for an artist. And by the way, Mitchell Johnson has a reception and opening coming up on September 7th over at Castle Hill. So I'm eager to go to see his new work. So now we're in the second wave, and again, remember, this is not an exact science. There are dates that kind of, go in and out of the different waves. But at this point, after the Second World War, everything started really booming along the way. You had a lot of cottage colonies being built, from Truro down to Eastham, and it was obviously it was the post-World War, baby boom, the push to the suburbs, just all the different consumerism that was starting after the war was over. But there were other things other than the automobile, even though that was important, that made the cottage colonies such a thriving business for the Outer Cape. Now, certainly one of the big things, and it wasn't an automobile, but it was the station wagon. And I think we all know about Ford's Country Squire. It enabled, to put in all the luggage, all the paraphernalia, and the kids going to the Outer Cape. And I love this one saying, I don't know who their PR people were at Ford, but they say the fetchingest cars on the road. I don't think fetching is a word, but I don't know. I won't tell, but anyway. And then the whole movie camera was another factor that kind of kept bringing people back as they watched home movies year after year. Maybe the same scene, the same sunsets, the same sunrise, but the home movie camera was certainly an invention, an affordable home movie camera that kind of added to the whole aura and excitement about a beach vacation. There were other things. It's true, it's a lightweight, foldable chair. I mean, try taking a heavy chair down to the beach that doesn't fold. This was a patent that came out in 1959, which made it easy to get to the beach and easy to store in the cottage. And then we have a bunch of other wonderful things along the way. In May of 1958, the supermarket came to Provincetown, and also you had Tupperware, which was really an essential part of the picnic and beach time, along with the cooler, the food cooler. And kids' books started coming out, really promoting beach vacations. You had hoodsies, which were that wonderful ice cream cup, half vanilla and half chocolate, so if you couldn't figure out which one you wanted, you could have both. And then there was the metal sand bucket. And these were really quite enchanting because they had incredible art painted on them, unlike the plastic ones today. So they really had, again, promoting the beach vacation and so forth. The one thing with the metal sand pail, is that they do rust. But I remember, we never thought about, getting a tetanus shot or anything else. We just used it. And what's amazing is that you can go on eBay and pay up to $80 to get one of these specific kind of collector's item. But it's fun. I mean, it's just, when you think about some of these products. So then we move in really from family home to the condo association. And this was, I'm not quite sure, and Greg, if you kind of can pinpoint, I know that Delfthaven was probably one of the first resorts, colonies that went condo, but I'm not quite sure when it all started, but certainly in the early 90s, Roseville, which is on Cornhill, went condo, and I had the wonderful fortune to sit with Stephanie and Herbie Park. Thank you. And they have been a long time, over 50 years coming in Roseville. And as they say, many tradition and memories made at Roseville are blues for our family. And I think that is just a beautiful way of remembering this. And then you met Barbara, and she has a condo at Sutton Place. And Sutton Place, it went from the Scott family to the Sutton family. And then LexFest bought it in 2012 and turned it into condos. And again, it's a way of having a piece of the cake, which I think is so important. There are a lot of tucked away cottages. I talked about roadside cottages. This one is Cranberry Cottages as you're heading into Orleans from P-Town. Right before you get to the Rotary, on the right-hand side, you'll see the sign for Cranberry Cottages, and you'll see the sign for a lot of these different cottages that are sort of under the radar. We've only passed them a million times. But I met with Tara Chavez. Tara here? Hey, happy birthday, by the way. And Tara, we sat down and she showed me the cottage. The setting is so beautiful because the maturity of the trees and the landscaping and the care of the cottages really, you never know you just came off of Route 6. And that they're so protected by all this greenery. And we just had a really good talk. And Tara, you really made me think about how important it is, how the condo ownership protects these cottage colonies from disappearing. And also the gift of being able to own that sliver of Cape Cod. So that certainly really had my head thinking in a lot of different ways, realizing how important the condo conversion was, and is in many cases. So just quickly, some unique kind of stories. Great Hollow Road. Jane and Barbara, thank you for telling me about this. At the end of Great Hollow Road, you know, where Whitman House is, was a cancer research institute. And from 1930 to 1948, it was a marine experimental station. It was then bought up and became Sunset Acres. Some new cottages were built and became a very attractive colony on the water. And that was eventually sold and made into one of the cottages, small cottages, is still there. But the other cottages were demolished and again it became lots for single-family homes. The Sears Kit House. This is always an interesting story. It is said that there are, of the 8 cottages at the Walsh property, 4 of them are Sears Kit houses. Now, I'm not sure about that because I couldn't get in to look at, you know, any signs of the fact that they were put together on site. But Sears, they offered their kit houses from 1908 to 1940. So if somebody says they have a Sears kit house that was built in 1950, impossible, maybe another kit house. But it had to be in that period. And the one thing with the Sears kit house, you had to be a mile or 2 from a railroad station because all the pieces came by freight. So this, from the Walsh property, it means that the boxcar would arrive at the Northborough train station. There would be 30,000 pieces. There would be 700 pounds of nails. There would be 27 gallons of paint and a 75-page owner's manual. And we complain about IKEA and putting furniture together. But the Sears houses are very special. Number 13 of the Walsh property is said to be moving over to South Island right out here. And I hope they preserve 1 or 2 of the Sears houses because there's real history there. Glider school. And Jay, you know much more about the gliding period in the 20s. Motorless flight was very popular, especially with the Germans, and that's a whole separate history. And they flew the gliders right here over Highland House, Cornhill and Highland House. But J.C. Penney the third, or J.C. Penney Jr., who's referred to as both in the history, but one of the heirs, obviously, J.C. Penney, the retailer, started a school, a glider school in the property now, which is Cook's on the Ocean, which is in South Wellfleet. And so what's interesting is that the glider school didn't last very long. It lasted a couple of years, and the Depression came, and that was the end of the gliding school. And a lot of the cottages that were part of, a lot of buildings that were part of the school became the cottages for the Cooks by the Ocean. And what's interesting about the Cooks by the Ocean property also, prior to that, sold 8 of the Cooks family acreage to Marconi. So it's really pretty rich in history. The only place I could find on the Outer Cape, and correct me if I'm wrong, to be in the National Register of Historic Places is Collins Cove in Easton. And in 1999 they were placed, which is really a pretty good honor for a cottage colony and for the Collins family. And then the other interesting little side story is Kalmar. We'll go back to Kalmar for a moment. They won Best Prize in 2022 for the large float in the Carnival Parade. So, just some fun stuff. So basically, to try to pull this all together before we open it up for questions and comments and stories, is that, and this is not statistically significant, but I dug deep into about 28 different cottage colonies. And where they are today, about not quite half of them are now condos. Quarter of them, 25, are still family owned, and about 22%, give or take, are gone. So that really kind of shows you the trajectory of where things are going. It was interesting, when I started this project, sort of an operating title, I said it was opening the door to the Outer Cape. And what I realize now is that Cottage Colonies not only has opened the door to the Outer Cape, but they're keeping the door open to the Outer Cape. So with that, I thank you very much. Questions, comments, and any stories? I know that Susan, you can, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm curious, when people started to come during the big boom years,
Yeah.
what was the average rent for families coming to rent one of the cottages?
That's a really good question. I don't know that answer yet. I don't know what the occupancy rate was, those kinds of, that I kind of started bumping into dead ends, but it's a great question.
What is it now to rent, say, a day's cottage? Do you know?
Susan, do you want to kind of project?
Some people have renovated and charged a little bit more, but I know that when it started, just the days we're doing, like, I should take another question, I'm gonna look it up. and
Okay,
make sure,
great.
But they kind of doubled since the days left.
Great. Yes,
Along those lines,
right,
of course, as visitors here, we all pay tax to the town to stay
Right.
here for the privilege,
right.
and that's fine. When was that instituted? Does that might give you some information about what the rents were?
Right, you mean the occupancy tax that, didn't that just go up in a bunch of the towns?
But when was it instituted?
It was, I think it started in B-Town, 6%. I don't know, it's another good question.
Okay, kind of dovetails.
Right, absolutely.
Were most of the cottages built on site, or were they built somewhere else and brought here?
It's a good question. Some of the early ones were former chicken coops. A lot of them were built from what was found on the beach, from shipwrecks and so forth. And some of them, as I mentioned, were moved. Back there, do you have a?
Just to clarify for the history on Sutton Place, after the Scott's family, the family that owned Sutton Place was the Dumas family
Right.
from Sutton, Mass. And that's how they named it Sutton East, which was Sutton East Cottages.
Huh.
They were from Sutton, Mass. So I just wanted to clarify that for the history.
Is that? Great, thank you very much.
I have an update.
Yeah, okay.
Well, I have to give you this because it's, so Dave's Cottages rental, linen, silverware, and electricity included, $5 a night, $30 a week, $100 a month, and $200 for the season.
That was last year.
So this is probably in the 30s, but I don't know, probably most people know this, but the Days is the Days family. And they had Days lumber and Days propane. So it was just around the time of the Depression, and he didn't want to lay off his workers. So he started saying, well, let's just build these cottages on Beach Point. I mean, Joe Days said everyone thought his grandfather was an absolute lunatic. They built about 12, but the cool thing was that he was trying to use the lumber that he already had and keep his employees, and then eventually added on. So that family has just built something, was meant to be for like working families, you know, affordable, and they just kept that up themselves this whole time.
Well, he built them right at the onset of the Depression, so, you know.
And many of the current people still rent, and some of the people have been coming there with their family 70 years, 60 years. Still.
Beth,
I have very fond memories of going to Provincetown for an evening and begging my dad to slow down so we could read every name of the flowers that they studied. And then ask my mother what that flower was.
We have one of the cottages on Cornhill,
oh,
and they were converted to condos in 1980.
right,
And some of the history, besides being historic themselves, but Lorenzo Baker, who I understand built them, designated the plot of land out of his land to the Mayflower descendants, so that the Cornhill monument could be put there, or a tablet. And we also have a photograph, which out of a magazine, so I assume it's real, but of one of the gliders that broke a record, broke one of the right flights records going off of Cornhill, staying afloat along. It has a level of side history as well.
absolutely. Well, Jay was able to, he found a video film of them flying over here, over the golf
Yeah,
course.
right here.
Yeah. Pretty amazing.
1928 video with sound.
Lots of oohs and ahs from the people watching. Yes.
I was just wondering, it caught my attention in the ad that we heard before from 1930 that they were advertising electric and your background in that industry. I was wondering if you tracked, had any sense of that along the way, how the utilities might have plugged into this big picture.
Well, that's a kind of an interesting question. I'm not sure where you're going for it. I mean, in terms of the role that electricity plays.
Yeah, I mean, like the Sears kit houses,
Right.
and I'm sure they didn't have batteries.
No, they didn't have batteries, and the utilities did not come with the Sears kit houses.
Right.
Utilities, you had to add your own plumbing, electric, whatever. But it's another interesting question. When did electricity, start? When did it become electrified? And that's something that I can find out.
It sounded like the 30s might be.
Yeah, probably, which would be the general.
Anybody putting solar on them?
That's a good question. I don't know whether the condo associations allow solar, but certainly, at some point, perhaps.
And there was a huge amount of wind out here, 200 years ago.
Yeah.
You've seen the pictures here,
Yep.
probably, Jane, this whole hillside was covered with windows.
Right, well, right.
Yeah.
Windmills, not wind turbines.
Right.
Okay, very, very, very different. Any other thoughts oh, please.
And that's how much we talk, great. I'm talking about food, because I think in the railroad-based cottages, that there was like a central kitchen, and I wonder if you have any information like how the food got there, how it was cooked, did people eat on long tables, did they take it back to their cottages?
Well, it's,
Like, where was it in the range from a boarding house to an independent unit?
well, each of those, the early ones would have a central lodge, as Highland House did.
Yeah.
And then there's some of the early brochures that talk about family-style dining. A lot of the food came from either on-site or local farms. There were a lot of local farms around. So most of especially in the early years, it was mostly what was indigenous to the area. But I don't know if people took their dinners back. The cottages did not have kitchens early on, nor did they have bathrooms. So things changed awfully quickly. Yes?
I'm used to it. In my house that used to have hillside cabins that are on the field where professional lights go.
Right, right.
Around. If anyone has any information about those cabins or for these love cabins are architect in the house.
Oh. Wait, I saw on Facebook a great photograph of the hillside cabins, but I couldn't find really much information. So thank you. Yes, sir.
I noticed that you had the White Village condo, all condo. After it's half condo and half family owned now, we rented there from the Bento family for a long time. And in the 90s, it was a bad storm that wrecked part of the seawall. And they had to pay for it. The insurance would pay the money, and she had to start selling them as condos. She sold them individually. The 13 cottages, if you face the cottages from the road to the left, are condos.
Right.
And the rest, the names would change to Ocean.
Correct.
And the other, a wonderful woman named Maria Bento, her husband ran them since 1976. They were a Portuguese family that came over, went to Canada, and came down. And I asked her, she was like, they were 70 years old, and they worked so hard just to maintain these cottages. So I said, Maria, why do you do all this? What did you sell? She said, because I love my customers, she said. I love my customers. She's a wonderful woman. She lives in Howard.
Thanks, Eddie. Thank you. One more, and then we can break, and then I'll have this.
I know one of the cottages down in Village, which is right at the bottom of the hill where you're going down. And I think it was one of the first places, one of the first places that went on. And I can't remember the dates, but when it was built, they made postcards for it, and the postcards, the whole thing was written, and it didn't go offline. So prior to that, we had the ocean.
Well, I'm going to hang around. Any other stories or corrections, I welcome. I'm welcome to hear. I'm going to turn it back.
Oh, I just have to jump in. This is. Well, I was going to invite you all to thank Jane, but you already beat me to it. But I was going to jump in, and yes, thank you for so informative talk. But beyond that, I don't want. There's more stories. There's more. I just want to harness some of the interest that's here, and not let it dissipate totally. So I'm going to go out on a little limb on behalf of the Historical Society and just say that there will be follow-up. I don't know what kind of, what form it will take, but I wanted to invite you all to become members. And if, also, just tonight I'm going to put a sheet here for contact information. If you have a continued interest in sharing stories or just cottage histories, I invite you to not just go away, that we can get together again somehow and give the Cottage Colonies their day. I'm going to leave the black page.